Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the mesh tool. This is a tool that is used for putting a mesh overlay on a shape and then applying gradients. So it's similar to the gradient tool, but it gives you a lot more freedom, as you'll see in this video. Now, we talked about the gradient tool in a previous video, and we specifically showed how you could use it to create linear and radial gradients. The mesh tool, though, gives you the ability to create gradients in a far more complex manner. And because of this, it's one of the more advanced tools in Inkscape. So I'm just going to cover the basics of how it works, and then you can experiment with it and see what you can do with it. People use it for all kinds of things, and so you may see something in this video that triggers a thought in your mind, hey, I could use that for this project or for this type of work. So let's take a look at the mesh tool. The mesh tool is basically a tool that operates on a shape that's already on your canvas. So to put a shape on the canvas, I'm going to set up my Inkscape program here. I'm going to open up two panels. I'm going to open up the layers and objects panel, and then I'm going to open up the fill and stroke area, and I'm just going to keep the fill and stroke open so you can see what happens over here as we work with this tool. So to begin, we're going to I'm just going to draw a rectangle on the canvas, and this rectangle has no stroke. Well, actually it has a black stroke on it according to this. So let's go to the stroke paint and we'll click that so that it has no stroke on it. We do have a red fill though. So we have a fill, but we have no stroke. So there's a couple of ways that you can apply a mesh to a shape. The first way is just select the shape and then come over here to the fill and stroke panel, and then you'll notice that the fourth one, or the fifth one if you count the no paint icon, the fifth icon here is mesh gradient, and if you click that, it will put a mesh gradient on your shape. Now notice what happens when I put this mesh gradient on the shape. Watch what happens when I click this. Okay, so what just happened there? Well, it created a mesh gradient and it laid it on top of this rectangle. Now you can see how this mesh gradient is laid out by selecting the mesh tool over here. So if we click this tool, you'll see all of the nodes and the control handles that make up this mesh. Now the diamonds are the nodes and the circles are the control handles. So that's the basic part of a mesh. You've got nodes and you've got control handles. Now that's one way to create a mesh, but I'm going to hit Control Z and get rid of that because there's another way that you can do this as well, and that is without the shape selected. You can just grab a hold of the mesh tool by clicking the icon, and then you'll see that your control bar up here changed, and you have all these settings for this mesh tool. Now I'm going to run through these real quick, and then I'll just show you the basics on how you can create meshes. So, and I'm not going to cover every single one of these. We'll just cover the ones that you can use in a practical way here. So the first icon here lets you know the kind of mesh that you're creating. So you can create a mesh gradient, or you can create the second one, which is a conical gradient, and we'll show you that here in a little bit. But the first one is a mesh gradient. That's basically a grid of points like we saw a minute ago when I put the basic mesh on top of the rectangle. You just had the four corners that had nodes on it, and then you had all those control handles. So that's what this one does, and you can see it's rectangle shaped, and that's the one we're going to work with on this rectangle. But over here to the right of the conical gradient, you have a couple of more buttons, and these buttons tell Inkscape which part of the shape you're putting the mesh on. So if you want to put it on the fill, which is what we're going to do, you want to have this filled in rectangle selected like mine is. It's got the blue border around it, it's lit up. So we're going to be working on the fill here. This other one is for working on the stroke, and I'll show you that here in a minute after we get done with the fill, because I want to highlight a key difference between the mesh tool and regular gradients like the linear and the radial gradient. I want to show you the benefits of using mesh gradients, because you can accomplish some things with it that you can't accomplish with a linear or a radial gradient. So that's what these four buttons right here do. Now you also have a rows field and a columns field, and just as it sounds, this tells Inkscape how many rows and how many columns you want in your mesh. Now we're just going to leave them at 1 and 1 because it's the simplest to demonstrate, and we don't want to put too many in here because it will bog down your computer, and it can even crash Inkscape if you start using too many and overworking your graphics or your CPU. So I'm going to keep it at 1 and 1 right now, but I'll show you here in a minute the benefit to having more rows or columns. So let's apply this mesh. We're going to apply it to we're going to apply a mesh gradient, and we're going to put it on the fill. And after you get your settings set the way you want it, all you have to do is just come over here and double click on the shape that you want to put the gradient on. And you'll see it does the same thing that we had a minute ago. The only difference here is if you use this method, you can adjust the rows and columns before you put the mesh on the shape. And I'll just demonstrate that. If I wanted to put a line, let's say I wanted to make this 4 smaller sections, I would just make this 2 rows and 2 columns, and then I would grab my tool down here and double click, and you'll see what happens. It adds an extra line right here going across, and then it adds another line vertically. So that's what those two fields do, and you can set them before you add the mesh if you use this method. So let's put this back with the single column and the single row. And now once you get your gradient set, you'll notice that all Inkscape does is it takes the color that the shape was before, and it adds these nodes, and it alternates between white and the color that the shape was before you added the mesh to it. Now you can change these colors if you want. So if I wanted to make this node a different color, all I would need to do is just take my mesh tool and click on that node, and you'll see that the control handles now turn into arrows. That means both of these nodes are going to affect, they're basically tied to this node, these control handles, these arrows. And you can move those around, and we'll get to that in a minute, but right now we want to change the color of this node. So I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to click yellow and make that node yellow. So now we have a yellow node, we have a red node, we have a white node, and we have another red node. Let's make this one over here a green color. So we'll just click it and then come down here and we'll click the green. And so now you see what this does. It basically takes the node's color and it blends it gradually with the node that's next to it. So this one goes from yellow to red, so right in the middle you get kind of an orange color. And here it's going from yellow to the green in this direction, but it has to pass through this red first. So you'll see it kind of turns orange here as it passes through that red. A lot more flexibility with these mesh gradients. So what do these arrows do? Well, they allow you to shape the mesh, and you can do that just by grabbing a hold of these. These work like control points for shapes when you're using the node tool. They work similar to that. So if I grab this, and I can just bend it like that, and I can bend it like this. So imagine you're trying to put color on an object that's not a simple shape. Maybe it's a person's face and you're trying to make their skin color blend. Well, that's where you would use this. You would shape your mesh to fit over the top of the shape, and then you'd add your color points, which are what these are, and then you could shape this to fit the contours of the person's face. And you can make this shape bigger than you can make the mesh bigger than the shape that it's on just by dragging these nodes out. So you can make it bigger, and this really highlights the fact that the mesh is a separate thing from the shape. In fact, we can make it smaller than the shape, and you see that the bounding box for the rectangle is still all the way out here. We didn't change the rectangle. All we did was change the mesh, the coloring that's overlaying that rectangle. So that's how you change the colors of the nodes. Now, if you want, you can also sample colors from other objects. I'll just demonstrate that by creating a circle over here that's green, and we'll make it a blue color. And then I'll come over here, and with the mesh tool, I'll select my mesh, and then I'll click on this node here and select it. Now I can come over here and I can grab the dropper tool, or as it shows in that tooltip, I can hit the D key on my keyboard from anywhere, and watch what my cursor does right here when I hit the D key. It becomes an eyedropper. So now as I select these nodes, I'm using my dropper tool to select the node and then choose the color. So now I can sample this blue color off of this object, and it gets applied to the node that I had selected. So that's another way you can change colors. I'm going to go back to the mesh tool, and so now we have a rectangle that's got each corner is a different color, and yet they all blend in the middle because these colors are emanating or radiating from the points that we have at that full color. And again, you can shape this however you want, but let's say I wanted to add some more nodes to this rectangle. Let's say I should have at the beginning I should have added 2 rows and 2 columns. Well, you can add those after it's created just by, if you look at my cursor here, watch what happens when I point to one of these lines. See that little plus at the lower right hand corner? That means if I double click this line, it will cut it in half, and it will create another line going this direction. So let's do that. Let's add another column by clicking this one in the middle. So see how it created another line. It just cut this in half, and now I can shape this line like that. Now if I wanted to cut this, and I have 2 more nodes here that I could assign color to. I'm going to leave them as they are because I don't want to add a color to those, but we're going to do something else. We're going to cut this in half going the other direction, but to show you that the flexibility of this tool, instead of cutting it right down the middle, I'm going to just cut it a little bit further down, because wherever you double click on this line, that's where the new path is going to go. So if I double click here, you see what happens? It adds 3 points. It added one here, and one here. And now I can move these around and shape the gradient. See how the green gets stretched whenever I move this? And the same way with this. So you get the idea. You can move this around and shape the way the color falls across this rectangle. And because it's a mesh and you can add as many points as you need to, you can always put more color in. Let's say I wanted more yellow right here instead of green. I could move this over here, and then I could just come down here and click the yellow, and now I've got some more yellow. However, if that's too much, I can just pull this down so that more of the orange shows. You can really shape the colors is what I'm getting at here. You can shape the color using the gradient, using the mesh tool. And you can do some fine tuning to your colors, particularly on objects that are irregularly shaped. So that's how you would add color to the fill. But let's turn the fill off on this one, and let's turn the stroke on. So I'm going to come up here and select stroke paint, and I'm going to click the mesh gradient. And then because my stroke doesn't have, it has a mesh on it, but it doesn't have any width, I need to come over to stroke style and ramp this up so that we can actually see what I just did there. I'm going to make this big enough where we can see it. I'm going to make it 16. And you'll see here now we have something very similar to what we had with the fill. However, notice the mesh tool now. Instead of working on the fill, we want to work on the stroke. So I'm going to change this to stroke, and I'm going to click on this with the mesh tool selected. I'm going to click on or double click this, and it will add the so as you can see, this tool is fairly sophisticated, so you'll need to find your workflow and how you want to interact with it, because we set this mesh using the fill and stroke menu here, and we're in stroke paint, and I put the mesh on it, but I'm not able to interact with it right now, so I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm just going to set this to a regular fill, and then I'm going to come over here and use my mesh tool. I'm going to select the mesh tool, and then I'm going to come up here and select that, and then I'm going to double click on that stroke, and now I'm able to interact with it a little bit better. I'm not sure what was going on there, but I applied the mesh to the stroke paint, this mesh gradient, and it wouldn't let me interact with it, and I wasn't getting any control handles. So it might be better, if yours is doing the same thing, it might be better for you just to fill the stroke with a solid color and then pick up your mesh tool and then change your settings like they need to be, and then just double click on the stroke and you'll get something similar. But now that we have it applied to the stroke and we're using a mesh gradient, we can set the colors just like we did before. So I'm going to select this one. I'm going to make it red, a bright red, and then I'm going to select this corner and I'm going to make it yellow, and then I'm going to make this one green, and I'm going to make this one blue. And here's where I want to highlight something that really shows off an advantage to the mesh tool. If this were a linear gradient, we could put 4 colors on it, but they would all travel in a line, in a straight line. So it would go red, yellow, green, blue, and then you would have your colors falling across this stroke like this in a linear way. If it was a radial gradient, they would emanate outward from the central point of the shape. So they may come from the center and move outward. But here you'll see something that you cannot do with a linear or a radial gradient, and that is we have a rectangular shaped object, and each corner of it is a different color, and it looks, as you can see, this gradient moves from red to orange to yellow, and then turns the corner and goes to green, and then turns that corner and then goes to blue, and then when it turns this corner it goes back to red by means of the purple blend. So it's a little bit, well, it's a lot different actually, and this is why you get all that freedom. Now a mesh on a stroke works just like it does on a fill. You can shape it, you can move these around to kind of fine tune the way the colors blend. If I want less yellow, I could just pull this back, and I could even move this off of the shape, and if I go far enough, there's no yellow really at all. So you can kind of see how you can, once you get the hang of working with this tool, you'll be able to fine-tune your colors and the way they blend together. Now I'm using bright colors here that contrast just so you can see what happens, but if you're adding like skin to a person's face, or maybe you're coloring some other object, like maybe it's a real world object and you're trying to color it, you're going to be working with colors that are very close to one another, and you're going to be blending them. But people use it for all different kinds of things. So that is the mesh tool. So let's get rid of this rectangle. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select both of these. Actually, just the rectangle. I'm going to keep that blue object there so I can grab color if I need to. Now the conical mesh, this conical gradient, it works the same way as the rectangle does, only instead of rows and columns, this isn't going to change. It's still going to be called rows and columns, but I want you to take a look at what happens when and actually columns, I don't think columns will even change. I think it's always going to be one, because you're always going from the center to the outside edge. But the rows can change. Let's say I want to have 3 rows instead of 1, and I'm going to change this just to see. Let me put I'm going to put something crazy like 8 in there, and I'm going to create a circle here, and you'll see that we still have our stroke on this. Let me turn the stroke off on that. We'll go over here and go to the stroke paint, and we'll just hit none to remove it. We'll leave the stroke style at 16 because we may want to revisit that. Although the stroke on a conical mesh works the same as it does on the other one, but the main part is what happens on this fill. Watch what happens when we add this mesh. Now we've got 3 rows and we got 8 columns. So I'm going to double click in the center of this, and you'll see what happens is actually we put a grid on there, which you can do. See how you can put a grid on a round object, but that's not what we're doing right now. This will work the same way it does on a sphere or on a circle as it does on a rectangle. So I'm not going to get into all of that and messing with how that works. I want to show you what this other mode does. And notice we're still on the stroke up here, so keep that in mind. If you want to work on the fill, you need to have the fill selected, and you also need to have the right mesh type. And we're going to use a conical gradient instead of a mesh gradient. So now watch what happens when I double click this. Okay, so what we have is we have The rows are the rings. See how there's 1, 2, 3 rings around this? So you might think of each one of these, like this middle circle is the first ring, and then this second one is the second ring, and then you have the third ring. Those are the rows. And your columns, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So those are your columns. The columns are what you might refer to or think of as like pie slices. So if you wanted to cut this circle up, or this cone up, into 8 slices, that's basically what we did. We just created these different slices. Now now that I've showed you what that is, I'm going to back up and I'm going to simplify this so I can show you something else. So I'm going to hit Control Z a couple of times, and then I'm going to change these back to 1 and 1 just so it's not as complex, so I can show you the next thing that I want to point out regarding this conical gradient, because this can be confusing. So I'm going to put this one on there, and so now you see that we have one row, right? There's only one ring, and it's the whole circle. And then you have one column, which is interesting because you have 4 slices. And that can be kind of confusing. We went from 1 to 8 a minute ago, and we had 8 slices. But when we go back down to 1, we still have 4 different quadrants in this circle. So that's something to keep in mind. By default, you get multiple nodes on your cone. Now here's the thing I wanted to point out with this. This cone, this looks like it's 1 point, but it's really 5 or 4. I think it's 5. I'm going to show you here in a minute, but first I want to add some color to these outer nodes. Let's select this one and we're going to make it red. We're going to select this one and we're going to make it yellow. Select this one, we're going to make it green, and this one can stay blue. Now see how the white is mixed in with this? That's an indication that you've got some other nodes in there that are still white, and there's one over here that's still white. So how do we get to those? Well, you can use your tool to move these things around, and it reveals what's really going on here. See, we have this one which is still white, so if I wanted that to be green, I would need to select it and change it green, and then I could put this one back. And now it looks more like what you might expect. So this kind of hints at what's really going on this cone shape. This cone shape is really a flat shape that's curved and shaped in a way that it makes the appearance of a cone. And just to show you that, I'm going to move some of these around, and you'll see that there's 5 of these nodes in the middle, and each one of them is connected to one that's on the outside edge. Right, so these 2 are connected right here. These 2 are connected. This one here is linked to this one, but see how it's still white? So if I wanted this to be blue, I would select it and then come down here and hit the blue. If I wanted this to be red, I would select it and come down here and hit the red. And then this one would be yellow. This one, of course, would be green. And this one would be green. This one's double, but you get the idea. So now if we put these all back, if I can get them back where they were, and it's probably not going to be perfect, these all go in the middle. Now it looks more like maybe what you anticipated it should look like. Now granted, that's not perfect, but you can always zoom in here and line these up exactly how you want them. But the idea here is I wanted to help you to appreciate what's really going on here in this underlying shape, or this underlying mesh, because the mesh is shaped, really we're working on a circle, but it's the color blending that makes it look like a cone, and that's really what's going on there. So you'll see that everything else about this is the same as it was on the grid. You can change these colors, you can move these control points around, and you can create more rows and columns just by double clicking on the lines that are in here. Let me just add another row, and I'll do that by cutting one of these lines, one of these columns. I'll cut one of these column lines in half, and it'll create a new ring. Watch what happens when I double click this. So it kind of follows the shape that the outer one has, which could come in handy if you're, adding them to, an irregular shape. It'll follow the shape that you've already created to some degree. But you can see here how you can fine-tune the shape, and now we have these additional color nodes here where we can maybe, let's say we wanted to change this to a darker shade of red, you could do that. So you get the idea. And if I come up here to fill and I turn the fill off, oh, I had a node selected, so that's what you want to do, is turn the fill off on the shape, not on the mesh. That's why I was highlighting earlier that the mesh and the shape are two different things. And so now we have this circle that we can't see because we don't have any stroke. Now we have the stroke set, and we can put the mesh on the stroke by coming up here and changing it to stroke, then double clicking on the stroke, and now we have our nodes for the stroke. And again, it works the same way. You can, although you're not probably going to be able to see it, but you get the idea. You can do some pretty creative stuff here just by, oh, I grabbed the wrong one. Oh, actually no, I grabbed the right one. But you see where I'm going with this. The mesh is on the stroke, but it works the same way as it does with the fill. You can move the mesh around and create some things that you could never do this with a linear gradient. But that's the basic idea behind it. Now you've got, we've talked about all of these. If you point to these, it'll kind of give you an idea of what it does. Like right now we're editing the stroke mesh. So, if you turn that off, you're no longer in edit mode with that mesh. You'd need to turn that on so that you can see all of the nodes and the control handles. But you get the idea. You can show handles. You can these basically tell you what they do. This is just another color picker. So if I wanted to change the color of, say, this one, I could come up here and hit that, and then come over here and actually it picks colors for selected corner nodes from underneath the mesh. Since we don't have anything under the mesh, that's not going to work. So some of these will work at some points and some of them won't. Basically just point to these and they'll tell you what to do as you're experimenting with this. I don't really use the meshes that much in the things that I do, but if I need some sort of a color gradient that's not achievable by a linear or a radial gradient, this is what I reach for. And it usually has to do with if you want to put some sort of a color gradient that's irregularly shaped over the top of something else. That's usually how I end up using it. for example, let's just get rid of this circle, and real quick I'll show you an example of something that we can do with this. If I go to my nodes here and I simplify this and make this a object to a path, now I have a circle with 4 points, and I'm just going to drag this one straight up, and I'm going to turn that into a corner node, right? And I want to just do that. So now you'll see this resembles a water droplet, right? So now we have a water droplet. Maybe I want that to be a little bit wider and maybe even a little bit taller. And now let's say I wanted to make this thing glow a little bit. What I might do is come over here and just duplicate the thing by hitting Control Shift D, or not Control Shift D, Control D, and I duplicate it, right? So now I have the underlying blue, but I also have this, and let's see, maybe if I change this a different color, let's call it white. So now I have the white on top of the blue. But let's say we wanted to put, actually we don't even need the white. Yeah, let's leave it like that. I'm going to make a color mesh that is on top of the blue, okay, but I'm going to make it white. So let's just add a mesh on top of it. I'm going to come up here, I'm going to leave this at 1 and 1, and I'm going to select this rectangle, the regular mesh gradient, and I'm going to do 2 rows and 2 columns. So let's do 2 and 2, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to double click on this. Now you remember it goes from the color that it was before to white, so I have all these white nodes. Maybe I should have made it a different color, but what I want to do is I want to leave this one white, I want to leave this one white, and let's see, all of these, and you can select multiple ones by holding down your shift key and just clicking each one that you want to select. Let's say I want to make all of these blue, so I'm going to select all of them, and then I'm going to hit the blue color, and for some reason it did not switch, because again, here's why I was iterating before. You need to make sure that you're working on the proper part of the shape. See, I was working on the stroke, which is not visible right now, so when I selected all those and applied the color, it was applying it to the stroke. And over here we're editing the stroke, and I want to edit the fill on this. So let's try that again. I'm going to select each one of these, and then I'm going to come down here and hit the blue, and it's still not giving me the, oh, maybe it's because I put the, and there's an example of what I was talking about earlier. When you work with it for quite a while, it will crash Inkscape. So save often, save early, and maybe you kind of get an idea of why I don't work with this tool that much in Inkscape, because it's easy to overload your system, or maybe there's some bugs in Inkscape that still need to be worked out. But whatever the case, you're going to run into things like that. So I'm just going to reopen Inkscape, and I'm going to recreate this shape. Let's turn that thing blue, and let's get rid of the stroke, and we're going to go back over here, make sure it's fully opaque, and then I'm going to go back to where I was before by selecting the node, tool, simplifying this down to a path, and then just dragging this up, and then holding down Control and clicking that, and then making it a corner, and get rid of these. Okay, so now we're back to where we were a minute ago, only this time I'm going to make sure that when I apply this mesh, I'm going to apply it to the fill and not the stroke. So you'll see my settings up here. I do want this to be 2. Actually, I'm going to leave it 1 and 1 because we'll get 4 on the corners with 1 and 1. So select the tool, double click inside the middle, and now you'll see we have this white, and I want the bottom of this, I want this to be white, and I want the tops to be blue. So I want this to be blue. You see where I'm going with this probably. So now we have, and really this is why I started to duplicate this before, because this underneath one, this bottom one down here, actually I think I want to put 4 underneath 1, and I want 4 to be a solid color. I want it to be the solid blue, so I'm going to change that to blue, and now we have this on top of the blue one. So we can make this shape a little smaller just by just a tiny bit, like doing something like that. And now here's where what I was saying earlier really gets highlighted. With the way this transparency or this gradient falls, it kind of looks like a linear gradient, or maybe even a radial gradient coming off of the bottom. But what if I wanted this to follow the contours of this drop? Well, that's where your mesh comes in handy, because now what I can do is I can shape this. I can make this thing any shape that I want, right? And I can control the way that this bends. So like, I can shape this the way that color follows the contours of the droplet, right? So now I can put a little curve in the bottom of it. It doesn't have to be so straight. And because these are regular colors, like these 2 white ones down here, I can go into my fill and stroke panel and I can even make those more transparent just by taking down the opacity on them. So if I select this and drop this down, right, so now you're seeing some of the benefits of this. And now, since this gradient is only on top of this one, right, I can turn it off, turn it on. I can even shrink it down maybe and reposition the whole shape. And then if I wanted to, I could even put a blur on this. So if I go up here to filters and do a blur, let's see if we can put a blur on it. See what a blur does. Live preview, there's a little bit of a blur. As I kind of push this up, it gets a little more blurry, right? You get the idea. And then you could apply the blur. You could put a vertical blur on there too. Let's take this down to 3 and 3. So you get the idea. Then if we apply it and close it, now we can move that blur around, and we could even, you know, reshape it if we wanted to. So you get the idea here. This would not be possible with a linear gradient because of this curve. This gradient actually curves instead of just falling in a straight line. And while this would take more time for me to get it exactly right, or to get it looking more realistic, I think you get the idea. You understand the difference between how this kind of a gradient works versus the ones that we covered in that previous video. So these gradient meshes, the mesh tool allows you to basically shape a gradient as if it were a shape, and that really gives you a lot of freedom, especially if you're working on things that you want to look realistic. And you know, it's basically the benefit. And like, if I wanted to, I could even tone this down a little bit more and add a little more subtlety to it. If I don't finish off this video right now, I'll be tinkering with this for the rest of your day. So just trying to get it absolutely perfect, but you get the idea here. So that's how the mesh tool works. That's a practical demonstration of how it works, and I'm going to even leave in the Inkscape crash because I want you to see really how it works. And when you're working with it, it's a good idea, if you're going to use the mesh tool, unless you have a really powerful computer, like I said earlier, save early and save often. Get in the habit of hitting Control S as you're working, because every time you do that, Control S, it saves a copy of where you're at on your hard drive. So that'll help you. If you do get a crash, you'll be able to open your project back up. You can pick up right where you left off. So that's going to do it for this demonstration. Just my usual reminders: I don't have a Patreon, I don't have a sponsor, and I don't have a membership where I charge for this information. I just provide it to help other people out as they're looking. You can support the channel a couple of different ways. One is you can check out my designs on the marketplaces that are in the links in the description, or if you want to go the free route, like, subscribe, and even leave a comment to give me some feedback on maybe some things you'd like to learn more about in Inkscape, or if you've got feedback on how I can present this information in a better way, I'd be happy to hear that as well. So I hope you found something in this video helpful, and thanks for watching.